Babaji, we're ready whenever you are.
Om Yo Brahmananda Vidadati Purvam Yo Vaivedamscha Prahinohi Tasmai Tanhadeva Atmaburi Prakasha Mumukshurvai Sharnam Ham Prapadje. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. That one transcendent yet all-pervasive entity, out of which sprang the divine Trinity at the beginning of a cosmic cycle, and who delivered the Vedas and the revealed scriptures unto Lord Brahma, who is an eternal bridge to immortality, who is partless, faultless, actionless, and divine, who resembles fire that has consumed all its fuel. I go for refuge to that supreme Brahman, whose light turns the attention of mankind to the Atman, the indivisible self in all. For there shines Brahman. May that Brahman protect us. May that Brahman sustain us. May that Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the world, with the teachings. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us. Peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. We have all gathered now from various parts of the world, and in the spirit of sadhu satsanga, to enter into what's called a seminar these days. Difficult to find ourselves together in the same room, what we used to call retreats, but that is still going on. And we sometimes with great effort, take long distance flights to be with each other, as we've just concluded recently in Oregon at Windward Waters, where we had a beautiful retreat on Kundalini yoga system. And the subject of this seminar is insights and impediments in spiritual life. And we're looking at both of those in a positive vein, basically, is that when we encounter impediments, those two, as Vivekananda has said, should be taken by the Vedantist as impetus. So maybe we could retitle it All Insights and Impediments for Impetus in Spiritual Life. We want to be able to move ahead with our spiritual growth amidst difficult situations. So coming to you bright and early in the morning here in Hawaii, on the islands, up here in the old growth Lehua forest, where everything's very, very peaceful. And in this case, sitting in front of our shrine at New Badranath. And usually the picture of Swami Vivekananda is right where I am. But since I'm covering him up in superimposition style. And we took him and placed him on his throne, which I can see just behind me, and are here in the company of these great ones. It's that divine company that is a great boon to us in these days and times. And disembodied gurus then prove that old adage that one can and needs to understand the formless nature of divine reality in the midst of form. So when you look at insights and impediments, quite often we'll see it in that way, that these impediments are superimpositions of nature, of Maya, and of our own doing, karma, over these otherwise free-flowing insights that we have. And in usual fashion, I've created a cover chart, a new chart that none of you have seen yet for this seminar. We'll look at that in a second. But I think I'd like to start things out rolling here quickly with this quote by Swami Vivekananda that has been niggling on my mind for some months, and I wanted to look it up. It turns out to be a very good heading, you might say, or beginning for this retreat about insights and impediments. And I can show it to you as I read it, if we can call up that chart that I put together yesterday called Ashtanga Kamarga and Ashtanga Yoga. Because I put that quote in its entirety at the bottom of that chart. Ashtangika Marga, of course, is the eightfold path of Lord Buddha. There it is, the beautiful clouds, as it were, inhibitors over the sun. And at the bottom of this chart, which I've placed side by side the Ashtangika Marga, the eightfold path of Lord Buddha, right next to the eight limbs of yoga. So the chart's called Ashtangika Marga and Ashtanga Yoga. So this is a very good way of pointing us towards these insights that the great souls, you see this, the subtitle there is Buddhism and Patanjala, mobilized for today's hands-on practice. We really want to take our sadhana, our daily sadhana, and make it produce fruits, spiritual fruits for us. And because there is, of course, a way of just attaining to sattva, or balance, and living in that, if one can master the other gunas of tamas and rajas. Very difficult for beings to do in this day and age, to get over that lethargy and also get over that restlessness. Yeah, I think you can keep that chart up because I'm just explaining it overall. It's not a chart that I actually created for this particular retreat, although it may find a place over the next 2 days of classes. But let's look at this opening quote at the bottom, because that's very pertinent to what I'm trying to say here. And Swami Vivekananda is very astute in his assessment of that. He's unique in that he can look at a culture and in a very short time come up with a good assessment of what its impediments are and the insights that would be best for it in order to penetrate through the problems of veiling spiritual life. In fact, I think in just 2 years that he spent amongst us here in America, he came up with much more insights about the American culture than any of us had in our entire life. So in 2 years, he could put together all the problems that were facing us as we try and delve into spiritual life. Another way you could speak about it is that retreat we just had on Kundalini Yoga, is that when that Kundalini yoga awakens at the base of the spine, then and moves up, spine being, of course, the subtle mind, subtle body inside. And then the false superimpositions start to fall away, and we get these great insights from the tradition. So here you can see this quote. Let's read it because it's very powerful, and something that he said and wrote to us after he had lived amongst us for some time. And this was, of course, in America too. He says, in the world, all things are done by people guided like lifeless machines. There is no mental activity, no unfoldment of the heart, no vibration of life, no flux of hope. There is no strong stimulation of the will, no experience of keen pleasure, nor the contact of intense sorrow. There is no stir of inventive genius, no desire for novelty, no appreciation of new things. Clouds never pass from this mind. The radiant picture of the morning sun never charms this heart. It never even occurs to the mind that there is any better state than this. Where it does, it cannot convince. In the event of conviction, effort is lacking. And even when there is effort, lack of enthusiasm kills it out. The worldly wise instinct is most difficult to root out. So particularly that last two sentences is very, very helpful to hear, although of course sobering message. So it never occurs to the mind of humanity that there's a better state than all of this that he just mentioned. That is just living mundane, worldly or earthly life. It never occurs to people that there's a state higher and better than this. And then when it does occur, it doesn't convince us. In the event that we get convinced, then our effort is lacking. In the event that we finally do put forth some effort, then lack of enthusiasm kills it out. I think it's just perfectly said, those four things, basically. Does not convince us, and when it does begin to convince us, we won't put forth effort to realize it. When we want to realize it and we actually put forth some effort, then lack of enthusiasm kills it out, and we give up our practice. So here's, you might say, in a general sense, all the impediments gathered together into one sentence that we need to face off with in the West and make sure that this conviction of Vedanta comes to us in a very real way. And when it does, put forth some effort and keep up our enthusiasm. You know that word enthusiasm in Sanskrit? Any of you know what that means? What that is? It's a very beautiful word called upeksha. Upeksha. There's one very enthusiastic student that I named Upekshini in the past SRV's path because it had that great enthusiasm. And in that case, it didn't last very long. So that's my point, is that when this enthusiasm, we have to infuse everything with this enthusiasm, and we have to make sure that our effort is very, very powerful one. If your ideal is high, my teacher told me, then your effort must be tremendous. So all of these things, very important, and this will start us out on this retreat as we roll along here. I'll probably return to this quote, at least the last sentence of it, to see if through the 2 days of these classes, we are keeping up our enthusiasm, and we are keeping up our effort, and we are checking in with our conviction about the truth of Vedanta. I was reading recently saying that the first experience that Swami Vivekananda had when Sri Ramakrishna touched him, probably on the head or on the heart, And Swami Vivekananda said he saw everything just going away and disappearing, like he was all of a sudden taken up off of the world, and everything started, walls and buildings and everything started vanishing. And so this, of course, shook the young man. He saw that how easily all of these things and relativity could just disappear and go away. So in that way, these impositions of Maya and nature, that the covering power, we call it, the avarana power, are to be looked at and penetrated and pierced through as much as we can. So we can come back to this chart, Ashtanga Marga and Ashtanga Yoga. I just put it together yesterday because I've always wanted to put those two eights side by side. But let's go on to the cover chart now, the chart that I created for the seminar, because we're going to be taking that point by point and going through it for the next few days. So let's call up the chart, Insights and Impediments in Spiritual Life. And so there you are. Maybe you can show the whole thing first so we can get a picture of that soaring soul depicted here by this bald eagle. High above the mountain peak, soaring in the skies of awareness, as it were. There we are. Over that ocean of nectar below, that lake of Amrit, that is mother wisdom. And with the moon eclipsed above. And all these teachings superimposed over the chart. It was just composed and put together about 2 days ago. And you can see the different facets there that we want to look into that have to do with profound insights. If you look up top, across the board from standing impediments. Standing impediments mean because things like nature and Maya and karma are always there in life as long as one's embodied. And so are things like birth and growth and death and old age and decay. And so are things, according to Sri Ramakrishna, like the 6 passions and the 8 fetters. Call them standing impediments because they seem to be a part of the picture, especially when you take the mind as your alambana, or the mind as your object of meditation, which is a very good and high level of alambana. You take it for a station of practice. You can start with earth and water and fire, as is depicted on this chart, and make those the subject of your meditation. But by the time you make it inwards to the mind and realize manas, the dual mind, and what's in the mind, and that everything that's being called up from the mind are giving you a combination of insights and impediments, then you've made great deep inroads into this. And so that's what we want. We want these insights. So you can see that the subtitle of this chart is Nadis of Intelligence and Granthis of Ignorance. And the quote up there, let's take that. Vibrant, living intelligence flows freely along open channels of pure conscious awareness. Directly from the Divine Mother of the universe into the hearts and minds of her precious spiritual sons and daughters. This quote, of course, put together from my memories of Lex Hixon, as he would speak like this. Some of these phrases are phrases that he used often, like pure conscious awareness, and the idea of this mother wisdom flowing through the minds and hearts of precious spiritual children. So, although I put my name there because I put it together from different things that he said, it's really from my memory of the way he used to speak to us, to try and to give us that enthusiasm we were just talking about, and use it to break through those granties of ignorance and open up those nadis of intelligence. So it's just an outright statement of positivity. We look at ourselves as Vedantists as having this living intelligence that Swami Vivekananda talked about, flowing through these open channels in order for this ever-present, ever-aware Kundalini power, or Saraswati, they say. Remember at the retreat we just had, we have Saraswati being taken into the central channel. So that's called Saraswati Chala. If you can shake her, the scriptures say, shake the power at the base of the spine, open up a hole, an opening, a channel there, and get a drop of Saraswati power, Shakti power into the central channel, and then breathe it up, bring it up with those Vedic breathing exercises that you do. Then that's called Saraswati Chala. You shake her. So, and she hisses. It's that the symbology is that if you have a snake there and you push it with a stick, it coils up and hisses at you. So that's what they say in the scriptures. You want to arouse her, and then she'll hiss and begin to uncoil, and this energy will work its way into nadis that were heretofore closed, maybe for lifetimes. Think of the quote we just talked about with Swami Vivekananda, how even when there's a little enthusiasm, then or a little bit of effort, then enthusiasm, lack of enthusiasm kills it out. Keep that in mind as you think about your own spiritual progress, because here in the embodied condition, then we all have this list of things that we just talked about that can be put under certain categories like Maya and samsara and nature and karma. Karma being individual and collective, both from the ancestors and from our own doings, from our activities. So that's a lot of impediment to pile upon the human mind and human soul and heart. So this is why we want this to begin to think in this direction, that there's living intelligence that's flowing freely and of access to us in our own body-mind mechanism, and is coming straight from the Mother of Wisdom, like that lake of waters there in the image on the chart we were just looking at. It's coming straight from the Divine Mother of Wisdom herself. Aim Hring Saraswatyai Swaha, Om Tari Tutari Turi Swaha, Sing Him Klim Aim Kamalavasanye Swaha, Durga Devi Gayatri Om Katyayanaya Vidmahe Tanya Kumari Dimohi Yo Yona Prachodayat. Om Shri Kali, Om Hring Shri Ram Krishna, Om Hring Shri Sharda. That kind of power that comes from words, but those words are invested with this living intelligence, and we want it to flow through the nadis. So we have to remove these impediments. So for the Vedantists, as Vivekananda has told us, these impediments are really in the thinking process. That's why physical regimens are not used by the Vedantists. They've already settled their breathing, they've already settled their asana, and they've already settled their mind, or in the process of settling the mind into a peaceful state. And they can sit in one place, just like so many great beings like Christ and Buddha have done. Sit in just one place and open up these nadis. I've sometimes used the example of a jungle closing in behind you as you move through it. a thick jungle, and you're opening up a path with it. And then, but as you pass through, all the branches close behind you. So life is rather like that. Life in relativity is that all those undergrowth and all those growths that are all around you are pressing in at all times, and you can keep them, you can open them up going forward, but after you pass through, they close behind you. And so you want to blaze a path as like through a jungle with a machete. And so your thoughts are that, and the pathways through the jungle are these nadis. And the greatest aid for that is awakening the mother power with these mantras. So these are, as we were saying here, and what we sent out to you, this contact, signs and means of contact with God, with the Atman, as was listed for this first class, and maybe this afternoon, the second class. So this contact, or this darshan, is open to us at all times. And yes, you can approach it with awe and wonder, or you can approach it with fear and trepidation, or you can approach it with hope and expectation. But I would say the best way, and the way the Vedantis approaches this living intelligence of Divine Mother, is with identification. Sameness of awareness, samadarshitvam, it's called in Sanskrit, that I am that thou art, or I am my Father, or one, if you want to put it that way. And so this is a positive, instantaneous way of keeping the nadis open, because we don't want to fall into this idea that, oh, my mind is a jungle and I haven't opened any pathways, so I'm just sitting here and I have to clear 1 acre. There's a song in India that says, if I can just clear 1 acre out of the jungle of my mind, at least I can sit there, without animals and insects and things interrupting my little space there that I've created for myself. But this whole jungle is a network of open channels, and your thinking process itself is that Shakti power that's running along them. I run through the hundreds and thousands of nadis that run through the precious human form. That's a quote from the Mother Scriptures, the Srimad Devi Bhagavatam. So what if we were to think like that, instead of there's so much out there against me, or I'll never gain enlightenment in this lifetime, and so forth. We keep putting the goal off to some distant future. That's why my teacher would often say, I don't believe in a post-mortem emancipation. He wanted his freedom right now and right here, because that's what it is. It's immediate and spontaneous. So that's why I'm reading that quote there. Vibrant, living intelligence flows along open channels in us. Open channels of pure conscious awareness directly from Divine Mother into our hearts and minds, as we are her precious spiritual children, her sons and daughters. So this is the kind of possession of Divine Mother reality that we want to affect. And always keep that in mind. So pairing that up with the expression that Swami Vivekananda used about effort and enthusiasm, keeping that going, then we can move into some of the teachings on this chart there. You see below the soaring eagle there, which is the soul, you might call the free mind, are the 7 realms of the mind. Those are the lokas, Bur, Bhuvar, Swar. Those 3 you recognize from the Gayatri mantra. Those are, of course, earth and the intermediate regions and the heavenly realms, Bur, Bhuva, Swaha, or Bur Loka, Bhuvar Loka, and Swar Loka. And then at the heart, when the heart opens, you have the great loka, Mahar Loka. And then we can also, of course, put these side by side with the chakras. And that would be the Anahata chakra. Then you have Janaloka, and the realm of the ascetics, the great realized souls, Tapar Loka. And then Satya Loka, the realm of those beings who are entering into formlessness. These great souls, they come in and out of Satya Loka. And so Sri Ramakrishna said, Naren is a perfect soul. He was the foremost of the 7 great rishis. He presides over the Satya Loka. And so he would help souls move in and out of formlessness to form. When I read that from Sri Ramakrishna, then I was trying to think of a metaphor for that and came up with that idea of a man living on a beach in a hut. So he goes out of his hut every morning and he just jumps in the ocean and then goes out in the ocean, swims all day. Yeah, it is possible. I myself was in days when we surfed, spent all day in the water and never touched shore sometimes. So you've been hours out in the water, just kind of immersing yourself in formlessness. And then you come to shore. And so in that way, Vivekananda would be there at the very apex of form and formlessness. And those beings that are getting used to formlessness, like going in the water, as Holy Mother said, sometimes you can be pushed in, sometimes you just get in really slowly because you want to get your body used to the temperature. So then eventually, then one time, maybe a soul that comes out of that hut of the body-mind mechanism goes into the ocean and swims and never returns. So Krishna mentions that also in the Gita. This is the path of those who go never to return again, the path of the sun. And this other path, the path of Vedic rites and rituals and so forth, is the path that they go to return again. And of course, that mention is of real sentient souls, because it's not even mentioning, except earlier, millions of souls who are caught in the regime of Prakriti. And that's why Swamiji has told us, in this world, all things are done by people guided like lifeless machines. There is no mental activity, no unfoldment of the heart, no vibration of life, no flux of hope, no strong stimulation of the will, no experience of keen pleasure, nor the contact with intense sorrow. So that's why he would look out on the world and say, those poor things, they're not living. They're not experiencing these things. Even intense sorrows is something that brings you fully into the moment. Like last weekend, we had that person that came and said her mother had just passed. So a lot of us have gone through experiences like that, the passing of loved ones, and how that brings an intense sorrow to bear. But if you have this open nadi of living intelligence flowing through to your hearts and minds, and you've opened that up and kept it open for years and years of practice. How many was it for our founder, like Sixen? Some 50 or 60 years. For Swami Sheshananda, some 80 to 90 years. And for some of us here, even 40 or 50 years, have kept up this practice and thereby keeping these nadis open and flowing and removing these krantis of ignorance as they appear, hour by hour, even breath by breath, if you need to do that. So in those 7 realms of the mind on the chart, then we can see the mountaintop of everything, which is Satyaloka. And then at the very base of the mountain is that Burloka, where humans and subhumans, like animals and insects and plants, all inhabit the Burloka. And so the soul soars over all 7 worlds and looks at those when it's in a perfect witness consciousness. when it's flowing along those nadis of pure living intelligence or pure conscious awareness. This is what's been called the art of perception, the spiritual art of perception, which we will look at later. It's at the bottom of this chart. But let's take up some of these profound insights and standing impediments and the time remaining. So the profound insights for the Vedantas, you can see them there. Basically, we can just run through them to remind ourselves. Consciousness itself is the unchanging reality. That's called Chaitanya. And so Bhagavan, Lord Chaitanya, was well named in that sense by the Vaishnavas when he was living in, I think, in the 1400s or so. Then some 300 or 400 years later, Shyam Krishna came forth as an emanation of the avatar. So Chaitanya consciousness itself is the unchanging reality. Whereas the Upanishad, if you remember, tells us that many people think it's time, many people think it's nature, many people think it's a deity, a particular deity with a form. But those like Gaudapada and others who are looking towards the formless essence of all things, just say consciousness itself is that reality. If you take that as a meditation and you say to yourself, I am a conscious entity, then how many nadis will open right at that moment? How many grantis will be dissolved when you make a statement like that? And of course, this has all been approached over time to arrive at great sayings like Tat Tvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, the self is Brahman. And then they'll leave behind these great Mahavakyas, these great sayings, for you to contemplate, say, well, this is how I summed it up. Like Swami Vivekananda summing up our problems in just a couple sentences. Or he'd come and take a couple days to read the Encyclopedia Britannica and then look at some centuries of gadding about, as the scriptures say, in the realm of lower knowledge or apara vidya. So like that, these great conclusions, siddhantas they're called, are one of them would be consciousness itself is unchanging reality. That's a profound insight to sport, to hold on to. Consciousness is neither mind nor body, nor thought, energy, or matter. Taking that out of two different sources, Upanishadic. That is, first one says, of course, one is not the body or the mind or the body-mind mechanism. And then the Svetasvatara Upanishad talks about consciousness being neither thought, energy, nor matter. And so that's a very profound insight to hold. When all beings, like particularly those ones who are doing work like lifeless machines, where there's not a lot of spiritual activity or unfoldment of the heart, as Vivekananda is quoting to us, they're moving through life as if matter is the only reality, and they have a sort of a relationship of surprise and experimentation around energy. And except for maybe the psychologist's thought occurs to them without knowing the source. She's the mother of our thoughts, Patanjali says. Chitti Shakti iti, she's the one who causes the thoughts to rise from the great mind and then causes them to flow through all the nadis. That's why I just chanted Yo Brahmanam Vidadati Purvam, and about the great Trinity that came up, that were vouchsafed, the Vedas and the Upanishads, at the beginning of a cosmic cycle. As that's this whole great mind full of these open nadis, and grantis haven't begun to inhibit it yet. Think about a mind being wide open and suggestible, open to the flow of living intelligence. And then all of a sudden you're thinking about something that's totally other than energy, thought, and matter. That's where most people are keeping their thoughts. Consciousness, number 3, is essentially formless, but can assume forms. That helps us, an insight like that helps us to sidestep this problem of nature and Maya, which is a standing impediment to the unchanging reality we just looked at. We see change, we believe in change. For the Westerner, they're looking everywhere for any kind of transformation that's going on, but the seers are looking everywhere for that which doesn't transform at all. So that's the difference between those who are looking into thought, energy, and matter, and those who are looking into consciousness. And those who are looking into matter, energy, and thought are doing so with their consciousness, which is very ironic that they don't see that it's the mother of consciousness herself that is looking into those things, availing their minds, the nadis of the thinker, of the intellectual, with this vested power of intelligence that's flowing through all the channels in their body, brain, senses, mind, and through the earth too. So when any sign of transformation comes like a form, then there's a great interest in it. When the form disappears, then there's no interest in it, and no wonderment about where it originated and where it came from. So that's another advantage or insight to studying consciousness itself. The next one is consciousness is eternal, birthless, and deathless. Or eternal, i.e., birthless and deathless. And just running through these before we take them apart, is consciousness is infinite. That is, it's homogeneous and it's partitionless. It can't be portioned out. It's, as we chanted at the beginning of this class, it's that homogeneous awareness, so that it's both transcendent and all-pervasive at the same time. Like the sky, like the ether, the Abhut says, as we've been studying on Sundays. Consciousness is also timeless. That's a very powerful insight to spend some time with. An hour or two just sitting and thinking about time. A meditation like that can go back to your childhood. You see how time has passed and how many number of years that you've been alive in the body. And you begin recalling all of these things that happened to you, and you put them into phases pretty soon. I had a phase where I spent some decades there, and then I had a phase where I moved and spent some decades there, and so forth. Lord Buddha uses that kind of reasoning in the Dhammapada too. Oh, here I will go when there's a summer season, and when the winter comes, I'll go down to the plains, and when it gets too hot down there, I'll go up to the mountains. Like this, a man's life passes, he says, and never knowing that, as Holy Mother said, death has no office hours. It can strike at any time. And so time becomes this great thing to meditate upon, and to realize that which is looking on the phases of time is transcendent consciousness itself. It would have to be if it's everything we just said it was. That is formless, it's eternal, it's infinite, and it's unchanging. On top of that, it's also inherently aware, intelligent, and sentient. Whereas you can only say that about objects to a certain extent, which is why we do study the Patanjali Yoga and the 8 limbs of yoga to find out about the different levels of samadhi that we can have with objects and beyond objects. And most people jump both because with the object, they think, I'll own that, I'll get pleasure from it, and then I'll become attached to it, unfortunately, and can't do without it. Those are the 3 modes in which people usually take on objects. You might call a 4th as taking them for granted. So you have those 4 ways which the father of yoga brings out about the relationship one has with objects, the subject-object relationship. But very important to take this different route that the seers ask you to do with objects is to have samadhi with them. So back over to Swamiji's quote again, there's no experience of keen pleasure, nor the contact of intense sorrow. So both of these things, what he called exquisite pleasure, can be gotten from the standpoint of the detached seer. Of paths, the 8-fold is the best. Of truths, the 4 truths, noble truths, are the best. Of conditions, detachment is best. Of men, the Buddha is best, as we hear it quoted in the Dhammapada by Lord Buddha himself. So in that way, you're thinking of this degree of manifestation from the Bhutas to the Mahabhutas beyond. That is from the insentient beings that come and appear in the mind, all the way up to the intelligence of mankind and the transcendence of mind, of the seers. All those things are shot through and through with this consciousness, which is inherently aware, intelligence, and sentient. So these are some of the profound insights to have that have been culled out. And there's one other in there too that I went past. It's consciousness is taintless, that it's ever pure. Cannot be tainted by any of its associations. Like air can be tainted by smoke and so forth, covered with clouds, but ether can't be tainted. So even among the 5 elements, you have that example as if Divine Mother is telling us that when you take the 5 elements for your meditation, then you can make these associations with consciousness, and then you can put everything in its proper order, like Lord Kapila did in the Samkhya Yoga system, put everything in its proper order. Sancharaha, prati sancharaha. From outward goes everything from the inward position. Then it returns back to the inner source again in a particular order of things. They looked at that as the order of 5s or quintuplication process. So yes, consciousness is taintless, can't be made impure by any of its associations. And that's why last week I chanted that Sadhanga natu naiva shuddham, Sadhanga yoga natu naiva shuddham, and Guru Padesha natu naiva shuddham, Mano Vinasha natu naiva shuddham. So even destruction of the mind's waves, Vinasha, Mana, that is the mind's waves, or if you destroy them, or quell them or neutralize them. That can't make the self pure because it's pure at all times already. And it's eternal, it's infinite, and so forth. So basically all of these insights put forth on this cover chart, and we should look at the standing impediments to them next. So you see across the top the standing impediments to a profound insight in terms of consciousness being unchanging reality. What comes up and gets in the way of us thinking about that? And you have to think about it yourself, basically. The seers can only point these things out to you, and then you have to take them and think about them yourself and come to your conclusion about them. Check them out with the revealed scriptures and the illumined souls. But if you think about unchanging reality and you were trying to hold that as an ideal in your head, in your thought process, and what would it that would be that would come forth as a standing impediment every time to knock down your best intentions around perceiving the art of spiritual perception? Perceiving everything is unchanging because your mind is provided with 5 senses that came out of it. And those 5 senses are outward going in nature: eyes, tongue, nose, ears, sense of touch. All of those things also are taken back in and meditated upon, dissolved back to the source. But if you don't do this daily sadhana, this daily practice of dissolution, which we've made rather prominent in the later years of SRV associations, the dissolution of the mind meditation came somewhere in the middle years of our some 3 decades or more of presenting these teachings. So if you're not doing this dissolution process all the time, then your high ideal of consciousness is unchanging reality. My very consciousness is that. Then you'll see that these senses connected to the mind are those things that are standing impediments to the realization and the holding of that kind of an ideal. Basically, those are the changes you're seeing in nature, and we can certainly see how science and intellectuals and so forth have gotten caught up in that. They believe in transformation. The seer believes in non-transformation, if you're looking into consciousness, that is. So the things that change in consciousness are not consciousness itself. They're the things that are appearing to consciousness. And so that's why the yogi or the yogini, the practitioner, wants to penetrate and pierce through them with this. That's where the whole idea of the third eye comes forth, and opening that inner eye of wisdom, as Krishna says to Arjuna in the Gita. Also, then on top of the impositions of nature are the insinuations of Maya. So nature and Maya sometimes used as synonymous terms or words, but you can see how nature applies really more to the mind after it's already manifested everything with its thought process. Maya applies more to the problems that are in the manifested objects once the mind beholds them as separate. So on last Sunday, we had that new chart, which I can flash again later in the seminar to you about how there's a fascination with the process of samsara, that the soul has a fascination with rebirth, and so comes again in bodies. And when that tendency to be reborn again it gets satisfied, and you don't feel like returning again to do the same old thing over and over again and go through all the transformations and so forth, then the soul is considered to be approaching the doorway or gateway to freedom. So let's look at the 6 transformations real quick, since we're here at the impositions of nature. So the impositions of nature and insinuations of Maya then are Well, if you want to show that one first, you can. I was thinking of the, yeah, we can take that. That's good. Birth, basically, yeah, okay, then this one. Good to see the whole chart when we start out so we can get an idea of where we are. And you can see the title of it is Transcending the Six Billows and the Six Transformations. So both in Buddhism and in Vedanta, these six are called transformations or changes. That image of the Buddha, skeleton-like Buddha, after he sat for so many days in the woods, is at the Gold Park Institute in India, in Calcutta. And I took a shot of that and then used it as the background of this chart for the six transformations. You can see on the left, well, let's go on the right first. Those are the ones we're more familiar with. Now, remember, when you change a chart like this, keep in mind what you were just seeing when we left the last chart. We're talking about consciousness itself is the unchanging reality. And the standing impediments to that are mainly our nature and Maya. If I were to go further with that, then I'd put karma next. But that's quite often in the making. With nature and Maya, that's already been made. And it's a standing impediment in that way. So the way we would put that in Vedanta is birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. That is, in the context of this seminar, the Guru is telling you, take consciousness as the unchanging reality. Say, I am consciousness. Chidananda, I am pure conscious awareness. Isn't that what the quote told us, that living intelligence flows freely along open channels of pure conscious awareness directly from the mother of wisdom into the hearts and minds of her precious spiritual children. So if we're keeping this and consciousness as the foremost goal and ideal, then we can't just say it once in the morning and then walk away and be unconscious. See, forget it. You have to keep these things in mind. And that is the practice of Vedanta and how to bring it into your life and into the world. And you have to do that when you go to work too. This is what you want to hold first and foremost. And of course, when you're working, it might have to slip to the background, but that doesn't mean that you forget it. You hold it. Sri Ramakrishna said it's difficult to hold two ideals, but it can be done, needs to be done. It's a little bit painful, like pricking your finger on a thorn bush, a rose bush. When you pick a rose, you come back with the beauty of the rose, but you also come back with a drop of blood and some pain. So keeping these two ideals is important. So as we look at this first profound insight, consciousness is itself unchanging reality. Then the things that stand foremost against that are nature and Maya. And here's the six transformations of nature according to Vedanta: Jayati, Asti, Vardhata, Dara, Kshara, and Mara. And these are what Vedanta calls the sadurmi, is actually a nice word they use sometimes for that, the six transformations. In Buddhism, it's not all that much different. You can see across the board on the chart. It's hunger, thirst, grief, delusion, old age, and death. So a little bit less transcendent view and more an immanent view. You might say that they're talking really about the problems of the senses in terms of these desires, which are these desires which can become great impediments, or they can just become the natural way of life. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're thirsty, you drink, so forth. But if you become attached to food and attached to drink in various ways, then that becomes a great impediment. So these are called the six billows because they are already puffing out, you might say, from the mind. Like clouds, they come out of nowhere and then disappear into nowhere. And some of these, like hunger and thirst, are natural, as they say, to the human condition. But then shoka and bhranti and jara and mara are very more harsh realities that come about. Grief is unexpected. Delusion is unnoticed. Old age and death are forgotten. They're not to be seen. As Vivekananda said, we were taught to meditate upon death in India when they were growing up, not to consider it as something morbid or unclean. It's just as a matter of course that bodies will die, but the spirit remains, as we're saying here, unchanging. It is the reality itself. The only way it moves is at Mother's behest. And that's why we chanted that. Pure conscious awareness flowing through these nadis. That's the only kind of transformation and movement that we want to see if we're keeping that highest ideal in mind. I think the rest of the chart is well, let's maybe look at the quotes on it. Top quote says, even as strong current of a river sweeps away reeds on its banks, so does death destroy all those with worldly cravings again and again. These deluded souls jump from life to life like a monkey from tree to tree. But whosoever overcomes the billows of relative existence will see their sorrows duly lifted, falling away like drops of water from a lotus leaf. There's that old metaphor that we get, drops of water on a lotus leaf, used by Lord Buddha. So you see he's talking about these deluded souls that jump from life to life. We can go back to Swami's quote, in the worlds all things are done by people guided like lifeless machines, remember? No mental activity, no unfoldment of the heart, no vibration of life, no flux of hope, and no stimulation of the will. So all of these lifeless machines are going on living. And so they're not even aware of the fact that the six transformations are constantly happening on relativity. If they were to meditate upon the six transformations from the standpoint of realizing their unchanging consciousness, as we're saying here, then the first thing that they would see, and we'll get to this as we look deeper into these profound insights, first thing they would see is that those things happen in relativity only. And that was one thing that Sri Krishna rushed early on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, rushed to tell Arjuna that all change takes place in nature, not in your soul. So the seers have discovered this great secret that soul consciousness is changeless, unchanging reality, we're saying here. And basically, as on our other chart, it is the unchanging reality itself. Let's finish up, though, the quote at the bottom of this Buddhist chart on the transformations, because it doesn't sound like Lord Buddha, but it came straight out of the Dhammapada when he says, renounce all thirst and cravings. That's one thing. Then master philosophy and terminology. So he's obviously into these great systems of philosophy and the words that accompany him. He's very much into that. And take your place among the foremost of all sages. Then bear this body for the last time. Think to yourself, I am the conqueror of all. I am the knower of all. I have relinquished all by the power of the self, and I am liberated. Straight from Dhammapada, Lord Buddha's own lips. If we didn't have Lord Buddha written there, we probably would have, if I have asked you who said that, you might have said Swami Vivekananda. Because those two beings think exactly like that. That's the sign of God, that we're saying in this class. That's the sign that you're close to God. When you've come close to beings like that, and you take up their words and you hear them, a few sentences even, and then you assign them to their source, and you see how they put this in a great order. First renounce things, then master the philosophy and the words, terminology, then take your place among the sages, then bear the body for the last time, then think to yourself, I am consciousness, I am the conqueror of all, like this bald eagle that's soaring on this other chart, in our seminar cover chart here. And know that you can relinquish everything that's in the way in terms of a standing impediment, like nature, by the power of the self, the very power of the Atman. I am Atman, all abiding. Many of you won't be able to be here next weekend when we take that up. We're going to look into the 108 names of the Atman, and in a little Hawaii retreat we're going to put on here with the locals, the locals we call ourselves. Now, while we're on that subject, we can look at the standing impediment in terms of the passions, the impositions of Maya, or insinuations of Maya. So let's look at that quickly. Go through these charts fairly easily and quickly. These two I'm showing you right now are in footfalls. But the two that I showed you earlier are not yet, of course, a part of any book. They're brand new of the last couple of days. So this chart we're showing here is the 6 transformations and the 6 passions, billows, and fetters, 8 fetters. So there you have a re-rendering of those standing impediments to the fact that you are unchanging reality or consciousness. Birth, Jayati. Sri Ram says in the Adhyatma Ramayana, beings rush to welcome the birth of a child, overlooking serious factors like delusion and suffering, which play into the embodiment in Maya. So it's where people who are living like life of machines might pump out children, one after the other. Oh, there, I've got another child. Now I have another child. Good, I have a son now. But they're not looking at those hidden problems in the mind of that child, the reason why they came to Earth, and then therefore needing to have some sort of guidance on how to remove the child's karmas before he falls into trouble, as we see it running rampant in this day and age. Talking about food and drink. So I show these futuristic movies, right, of people in the future, and the world has gotten fallen apart. They're trying to put it back together again, and so there they are trying to make a better world, and all of a sudden says, "Okay, well now let's take a break and have a drink." So in the future, they're still drinking alcohol. They never found out that alcohol is, according to Buddhism, one of the greatest sins and problems that there is. To drink it, to sell it, to even to handle it. So, it's just unbelievable how the very problems that persist are there in the future too, and they're not getting rid of them. They're not, as Buddha just said, renouncing them by the power of the self. And so this is what attends upon people's birth, like a birth of children come forth with this desire to eat and drink without that higher consciousness in place. He says about growth, the illusion of growth is one of Mayic elements which attaches men and women to the ever-changing realm of name and form. Well, if you want to talk about unchanging reality, then the standing impediment, of course, is going to be the unchanging, the ever-changing realm of name and form. So that's an insinuation of Maya. That's, of course, Vivekananda told us that. Name, form, time, space, cause and effect. That's what's called Maya in a nutshell. As far as disease, he says, outside in the relative world, there are diseases which, though they have their origin in the subtle mind, manifest harshly in the body. So not content just to talk about externalization and the problems and risks of being outward, of the outward going senses, he quickly says there, they have their origin in the subtle mind. That is the subtle body. So if you want to get rid of that desire for whatever it may be, including alcohol and infatuation with food and name and form and so forth, then you're going to have to go into the subtle body, into the mind, and extricate that desire. And there are several good ways to do that, as we know in Vedanta. But they will manifest harshly in the body otherwise. And people are finding that out all the time, that the body has its cycles and goes into ill health. And all of a sudden, life gets upset. And then health returns again. And then it goes away again. So seems like only the yogis who are practicing this subtle art of renunciation or moderation, those two paths are the best, renunciation, moderation. Only they stay free of disease. Birth, growth, disease, and then decay. With the life force literally squeezed out of the various human vessels, then comes the collapse of and dissolution of the human frame into dust. So they're not giving a very happy picture there about the presence of one of these 6 transformations called kshara, or decay. And then old age follows. These are the kind of things that are forgotten in rebirth. Come through the curtain of nescience, and you forget about your last death and the pain that you had leading up to it. And you're just all enamored with this new body, this new birth. Of course, you're helpless for some years as a baby. You need protection and so forth, and need sustenance, mother's milk and all of that. And so there's, as Krishna says, the presence of evil in birth and in death. You have to be aware of that. So that means most people aren't aware of it, so they just have to forbear it. But those who are aware of it, they have to forbear it in order to bring these teachings into the world, so that people can progress towards this ideal of I am the unchanging reality. Or as we said, and we'll say later, our next, not the body-mind mechanism, not matter, energy, or thought. About death, Sridham says, the grim reaper, Yama, moves amongst the young and aged alike, gathering heads like a farmer picking ripe melons during a seasonal harvest. And I think he got that out of the Upanishads too, which also talk about the gray heads, cutting of pumpkins and so forth. Other standing impediments, because we're talking about what challenges us, and maybe talking about conviction and resolve, right? And enthusiasm. That's kind of our motto for this seminar that Vivekananda gives us. So if you're speaking about that in terms of unchanging reality, then you've got these two problems: the impositions of nature and the insinuations of Maya. So for nature, we use these things that are natural to the process of embodiment: birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death. For Maya, you could look more towards these things that can be controlled, which are a part of Maya. You're never in Maya. It is Maya that is in you. So be through with it, be done with it. So nature, there's not a lot we can do about that. Some very profound philosophies have even called nature its own reality, as if it were somehow separate from the soul. And the soul looks at it, becomes enamored with it, and then takes a body in it, which implies that originally you were bodiless and you saw nature and you were attracted to what was there. And so you mixed with it. You had a relationship. Consciousness had a relationship with matter. That's the whole idea of Purusha and Prakriti and Samkhya is about that. And so in the case of what comes out of that relationship, if it's actually a desire to be in union with nature, then all of a sudden you're thinking, I'm born and I'm dying. We can look at that chart again, which we had last Sunday, which is very good at explaining that later in the seminar. But if you get into nature and then you become comfortable in the body, then you've got these things that are more pertinent to what they call the world bewitching Maya. So there's the six passions pictured there. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. That's actually a sloka, almost a sloka in itself out of the Bhagavad Gita. Kama, Krodha, Loha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. This is Krishna telling Arjuna about lust, anger, greed, delusion, vanity, and jealousy. And all of these can be kept at a minimum. They're present in the mind and in Maya, that is the mind in Maya. But as the mind starts to become pure mind and withdraw itself from the association with these six passions, then those things minimize. Anger is demonic, Sri Ramakrishna said, but it's also impossible to get rid of it. So keep it at a minimum. Then there's the six billows there, which we looked at already. Kshuha, Pipasa, Shoka, Bhranti, Jara, and Mrityu. Hunger, thirst, grief, delusion, dotage, and death. And then the eight fetters below. Hatred, shame, lineage, pridefulness, fear, secrecy, caste, that is pride of caste, really, and shoka, grief. Those are a chain that holds. See those eight fetters there. So if you wanted to hear my summation of these standing impediments, it would run something like this. Preoccupation with relative existence is to be transcended. When impeding factors such as the six transformations, the six passions, the six billows, the eight fetters, the three gunas, and the pairs of opposites besiege mankind at every step, all of them attended by constant change and pervasive suffering, how desirable can a worldly life be? So, going through some old territory, I know, but if you didn't know about the 6 transformations, the 6 passions, the 6 pillars, the 8 fetters, and the 3 gunas, and the pairs of opposites, then you wouldn't know it was impeding the affirmation that you want to make, that I am pure consciousness, unchanging, the unchanging reality. And therefore you wouldn't know what you were up against. So good to take these as the first of these profound insights in standing impediments. And we can now take a 5-minute break, I think it is, and we can return, or a 10-minute break, yeah, and then return, 15-minute break, and return for some question and answer period. Namaste.
You okay?
Yeah, a little silly. Mhm.